President Joe Biden has given 50 years of his life to public service. Hailing from Scranton, Pennsylvania, he came to Washington in 1972 after winning the Senate race in Delaware. He remained in Washington for the next half-century, during which he became Barack Obama's vice president from after the 2008 election in 2009 through early 2017. He climbed to the highest position in US government, winning the presidency in 2020. He defended his presidency in a farewell speech Wednesday and issued a warning. Take a look.
You know, it will take time to feel the full impact of all we've done together. But the seeds are planted, and they'll grow and they'll bloom for decades to come. At home, we've created nearly 17 million new jobs, more than any other single administration, a single term. More people have health care than ever before. And overseas, we've strengthened NATO. Ukraine is still free. And we've pulled ahead of our competition with China. And so much more. I'm so proud of how much we've accomplished together. I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. And this is a dangerous that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
We are calling on distinguished Professor of History Allan Lichtman to discuss the Biden legacy because I recognize he's a renowned authority on American history and politics. Lichtman's books have won major national awards, and I've often sought his commentary and insight for The Hill. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you so much.
So obviously, President Biden is leaving office with rather lukewarm approval ratings, to say the least. I mean, pretty low by historical levels. But we have also seen some presidents of whom that is true be judged more kindly by history over time. So what's your overall take on what the outgoing president's legacy will be?
Yeah, I'm often asked this at the end of a presidential term, and I'm sometimes tempted to invoke the old Zen saying, unask the question. Because as Biden pointed out in the clip you showed, it takes many years to fully judge the accomplishments or problems of a presidency. But I'll give you my take on the first draft of the Biden legacy. And like the legacy of most American presidents, it's a mixed one. As he rightly pointed out, he has major accomplishments, but also significant setbacks. On the accomplishments, it was Biden and Biden alone who put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from quickly conquering Ukraine, that's kept Ukraine alive for some 2.5 years, and kept Putin from threatening America's national security by going after our European allies. It was on Biden's watch that we finally got a brokered ceasefire and partial hostage release in the Middle East. I understand Trump played a role in that, but this was based on a framework that Biden had set out way back in May of 2024 and had worked diligently to achieve. In domestic policy, Biden has more accomplishments than any president since the 1960s. The stimulus bill that brought us out of the deep recession, the CHIPS bill, the bill to reduce drug prices, the infrastructure bill, the bill to aid veterans injured by the burn pits, the climate change and tax bill. It's an extraordinary legacy of legislative accomplishments. On the other hand, we know there are real setbacks, and the president's tenure ends in what I would call a real enigma. The Biden administration got off on the wrong foot with the disastrous optics of the Afghan withdrawal. The American people are expecting competence after the chaos of 4 years of Donald Trump, and they didn't get it in that first impression. And you know, you never overcome a first impression. He also had near record high inflation in his first 2 years, and inflation, its impact doesn't end. It reverberated throughout the administration. And perhaps most significantly, he never developed a compelling message to reverberate with the American people. So, regardless of all his accomplishments, they were never really recognized by the American people, and that hurt him in terms of extending his legacy through a second Democratic administration. We also don't know the full story about the president's cognitive issues. We may never know, but we may at some point. But we do know that he was the only elected president on the eve of the national convention of his party to be openly and viciously trashed by members of his own party, by the leaders of his own party, and be forced to withdraw his candidacy and be cemented in as a one-term president. Now, I say his legacy ends in enigma. As you point out, his approval ratings leaving the White House are historically low. And in the past, when presidents have had that kind of low approval, it's because of one of two things: either an bitingly war gone sour, like the Korean War or the Vietnam War, or a terrible economic decline like the recession of 2008 or 2020. We didn't see any of that on Biden's watch. And yet his approval ratings are the kind of down in the dumps record that you would expect on a sour war or a bad economy. Historians, political scientists, and commentators will be examining for a long time why Biden never resonated with the American people and leaves office, despite all these accomplishments, with such a dismal rating.
Well, Alan, I actually don't think it's that difficult to figure out. I mean, we had rampant inflation throughout the Biden administration, a crisis at the southern border with millions of illegal aliens coming across from Mexico. You also had an increase in foreign conflict, whether it was the war in Ukraine or the conflict between Israel and Hamas. We also had a cover-up of the president's cognitive decline. And at the end of his time in power, he decides to give a blanket pardon to his son after accusing his political opponent of being the one weaponizing the Justice Department and being corrupt. I mean, those are just a few of the issues, not to mention the Afghanistan withdrawal, which you mentioned, which was more than just an optics problem. It was a competence problem. So, I mean, given all of that, is it any surprise that Biden's approval rating sits at 33% as he leaves office?
It is a surprise. I mean, you present that in the way, the Republican talking points
It's
would
not talking
present it.
points,
There
they're
wasn't
facts,
rampant
Alan.
inflation, for example, throughout the Biden administration.
9% isn't.
He brought inflation, let me finish. He brought inflation down by about two-thirds to three-quarters. Inflation is now back down to about just over 2%.
2.9%.
And it was the world, not just Joe Biden, that suffered from high inflation in the transition from the pandemic. And Biden built the strongest economy in the world. It's been marred by a lot of disinformation.
By
But
what
no
measure is
other
the economy
world
the strongest in the world?
matches the economy that Biden has built. And in terms of the foreign conflicts, as we said, it was Biden who kept Ukraine alive from the aggression of Putin. It's Biden who worked diligently for so many months to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. It's Biden who actually brought down the influx of immigrants and who worked in a bipartisan fashion to develop a new comprehensive immigration reform bill that Donald Trump killed. So yeah, you
Alan,
can
how
make
could
these
you
talking
credibly
points
argue that
against
Biden,
Biden, but it's not comparable
they're,
to a recession or a sour war.
Alan, how could you credibly argue that Biden reduced the number of illegal immigrants when it was his policies that led to the massive increase in the first place? That's like saying, I set my house on fire, but then I put it out.
Look, you got to credit Biden with what he did. He reduced the illegal immigration down to levels equal or lower than where they were on the Trump administration and brokered a deal to solve the problem that Trump killed, not Biden. And moreover, we have vast amount of disinformation about undocumented immigrants. We've got this disinformation that they're these vicious criminals, that they're these killers, that they're eating your pets, all of which is false. Undocumented immigrants are the most law-abiding segment
That's
of
not
our
true.
society.
Al-
Study after study shows
that's not
they
true.
commit crimes, including violent crimes, less than half the rate of Native Americans. So I think a lot of the problems that Biden's face is what he pointed out in his farewell address, the control of oligarchs like Elon Musk over our sources of information. It's been reported that Elon Musk's disinformation was seen by over 2 billion viewers.
Allan,
It's very difficult to establish a legacy in an era of disinformation controlled by a very few.
Allan, I wanted to get back to the domestic point that you were making in relation to Biden's domestic achievements not being fully recognized as you see it. Other presidents, for example, former President Obama had the Affordable Care Act, which was obviously a signature achievement that, many people disagreed with, but was nonetheless something that you could kind of hang your political hat on, so to speak. Do you think Biden suffered by the lack of those kind of accomplishments?
Oh, absolutely. I do think Biden very much suffered by the coverage of his administration and fundamentally by his own inability to sell his accomplishments to the American people. I have a live show every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern at Allan Lichtman YouTube. For over a year, I have been blasting the Democrats for their terrible messaging. It could not be worse. They have yet to develop a simple, compelling message. The most compelling message I heard from the Democrats was after the election, a few days before Biden was going to leave, that very powerful farewell address. Why hadn't we heard that kind of ringing declarations over the 4 years of the Biden administration? The presidency is not just a policy-making body. It's also a means of connecting with the American people and promoting the politics that are necessary to preserve your legacy and carry out your vision. And Biden and the entire Democratic Party could not have been more deficient in that regard.
Allan Lichtman, a distinguished professor of history, we appreciate you joining us, a spirited conversation, and thanks for joining Rising.
Thank you. Excellent conversation. I appreciated it.